Good day, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. And today I am here with the incredible Lindsay Wesker. Lindsay has an extensive biography with work spanning from the 1980s to present day. Lindsay, if we can please begin with a brief overview of your career.
Brief overview. My goodness, it's 40 years. I'm not sure how brief it's going to be. So I started as a music journalist in 1981. I did my first pirate radio show in 1982. I started working in record companies in 1983. I worked at two major labels. In 1986, I joined a pirate radio station called Kiss FM, and I stayed with Kiss for 8 years. So I spent the first 4 years helping them to get a legal license, and we got a legal license in 1990. Then I was head of music there for 4 years. I left Kiss in 1994. I went back to working in record companies, and I worked at 3 independent record labels. I joined MTV in 1999. I stayed there for 19 years, and I created 3 television channels for them, MTV Base, MTV Hits, and MTV Dance. And I began teaching here in 2019.
Incredible. And if you can take us back and illustrate for us, what was the London music scene like in the latter part of the 1990s, starting from around 1998?
1998. Well, Kiss had been on for 8 years, and I think it had a massive cultural effect. I think what it did was it introduced a lot of people to a lot of different kinds of music. So I'd really like to think that Kiss was very, very helpful in just broadening, everybody's understanding and appreciation of popular music. There were lots of underground scenes that were happening that people just didn't know about. So we kind of brought them to the forefront. The whole kind of jungle and rave and drum and bass scene, and there was a fantastic UK hip hop scene. And then in 1999, pretty much as I joined MTV, the whole UK garage thing came through, and that was a UK genre. I mean, the Americans had no knowledge of it, had no real appreciation of it, didn't really understand it. But it was a huge scene in the UK, and it was a real mashup. It was a real mashup of lots of different genres. It was kind of hip hop and R&B and dancehall, all kind of mixed up together. But yeah, very, very exciting time for new genres. And I think it altered the complexion of London. I mean, London just became a much more integrated city, a much more multiracial city. There was like white people having babies with black people, and black people having babies with Indian people, and Indian people having babies with Chinese people, and it was just so mixed up. And like when you go to schools these days and see the kids they produced, it's like just every kid in there is mixed race. It's sort of dual heritage, or whatever you want to call them. It's like all the kids are a mixture of all these different races, and they all sound the same. All the kids sound the same. They all talk the same language. They're all different mixtures of ethnicities, they all sound the same. It's so funny. But I think the music kind of helped that happen, because from the music came the clubs, and the clubs were just this melting pot. It's like people came, they drank, they danced, they flirted, they fraternized with each other, and they found partners and found husbands and wives and made babies, and it just changed everything.
And what were the notable clubs at this time?
Well, I mean, the UK garage scene in particular was a very London place. It was very London music. Most of the big clubs were in London. There was a huge club in Vauxhall. I remember. You know what? I remember what it used to be called. I can't remember what it became. It used to be called the Podium. I can't remember what it became. Colosseum? Would it become the Colosseum? Yes. There was an appreciation of UK garage kind of outside of London, but it was basically a London thing. It was a bling thing, It was a really extravagant, ostentatious thing. It's like, when I think about the UK garage scene, I just think about just glamorous people. They were dressed to the nines, and all the cars were huge and loud, and they were just, it was a whole scene centered around big buckets of ice and champagne. They drank so much champagne, it was just crazy. And there was a vibe. There was always a vibe, man. It was like a dance hall, like a sound system clash. There was always someone on the mic hyping the crowd. So as I say, the music was a mixture of hip hop and R&B and dance hall as well, all mixed up together. It was a purely up-tempo scene. There were no UK garage ballads. It just didn't exist. It was all dance music. It was all about dancing. And yeah, what a vibey scene it was. My goodness.
Sounds absolutely fascinating. And I feel as though a lot of the glitz and glam has sadly evaporated from much of the dance scenes today. I guess it went hand in hand with channels that you helped to form, such as MTV Base, which brings me on to my next question. With no social media at the time, what promotional strategies were employed?
Well, before social media, the traditional ways of promoting were, the old school ways of radio and TV. So you had legal radio stations, you had pirate radio stations. You used whatever radio station you could, your local station, anything, local stations, regional stations, national stations. You kind of sent your music there, and hopefully they would play it, and hopefully they would, call you up for interviews so you could do interviews there. And there were TV stations, obviously there were all the MTV stations, there were all the box stations, Box TV and Kiss TV and Channel U and SBTV, like online TV stations. There was like a whole range of places where you could send your video. And yeah, back in the day, those were the traditional ways of doing things. And newspapers and magazines, of course, if you could get written about, interviewed and written about in magazines and newspapers. But that was how it used to be done.
Ah, the good old days. But the 1990s was also a crucial and pivotal point in London after the deaths of Princess Diana, Stephen Lawrence, and Damilola Taylor. I was so young, but I can remember the impacts that these tragedies had within my community, and also the deaths of international superstars such as Biggie and Tupac. How did these regional and international events impact British culture at the time?
I think, in terms of the wider culture, London London is a different place. It's a very, very different place. It's even in comparison to Birmingham or Manchester. I mean, London is completely unique, and it's like it's just so integrated and so. I mean, obviously, there still were racial tensions, but in terms of integration, it's like there was just so much more of a mix-up of people. It's like your school, your university, your workplace. It was just a real mixture of people. I mean, around that time, so it was the end of the Labour government, and it was the beginning of 14 years of Conservative rule. So yeah, I mean, it was. I don't know. The parties change, but nothing ever really seems to change. It's still the rich and the poor. I mean, it's you know. But I mean, I was able back in the day. I was able 86, late 80s. I was able to have a job and buy property. It was possible to get a mortgage and buy a property. And over time, that balance has changed. I mean, for me, that's the most radical change in society. It's like the wages no longer match the price of the houses. So you now have a generation. I mean, I've got my 35-year-old son living with me at home. I mean, he can't afford to move out. And I know there's a lot of people in their late 20s, early 30s who'd really like to move out of home and they can't. So, back in the, I started dating my wife in 86 and we kind of bought our first piece of property in 1990. Even back in 1990, you could get a mortgage, you could buy a piece of property. And now it just seems impossible. Now getting a mortgage it just seems impossible. So for me, that's been the major economic shift. But people still love their social lives. People will still find money to go out. People will still find money to go out and have a good time. Even though the Beyonce tickets are whatever, 300, 400, 500 pounds, people will still find the money to go and see her.
That's so true. If anyone saw Beyonce recently, let me know. Was it worth it? And going back to underground artists, Lindsay, in the late 1990s, do you feel that their presence changed the trajectory of British culture?
I think the major change that all of those underground musics made was just the mixture of people, the number of different types of people who came together. The thing about those underground communities is like they were a community, they were a family. It's like if you were on the scene, you were on the scene. It really didn't matter what you looked like, how you dressed, what background you came from. It didn't even matter if you didn't have money. It's like if you were into the scene, you were accepted by the scene, accepted by the community. And it's like, it just allowed just people to come together, no matter their background, no matter their ethnic background. It allowed people to come together. For me, all of that music, all of those underground scenes, really promoted a fantastic feeling of kind of one family. Bob Marley, one love. Kind of promoted all of that. And, no matter what was happening economically, politically, the music really did a great job of bringing people together and creating some kind of, racial harmony, whereas out in the big wide world, there seemed to be people desperately trying to force people apart. And the music actually, for me, brought people together.
Power of music, hey? Now, moving on to the technological side of the music industry, what advancements do you remember and how did it alter the scene?
Yeah, I mean the big technological advances were kind of the creation of DAWs, digital audio workstations, and um, this allowed people to record at home. Now, in the late '80s, the first DAWs came out, kind of basic four-track recorders that you could record music at home, create demo recordings of songs at home. So that was a massive technological development. Home recording. Going to recording studios was very expensive, so home recording really allowed everybody to make music. It allowed people to record in their homes, and once the MP3 was created in the late '90s, and you kind of had the whole file sharing movement in 1999. I mean, that really had a profound effect on the music industry when the MP3 was created and file sharing began to really become a big part of life. All of a sudden, people were like, well, hey, I don't really need to buy music anymore. I can just get a file from a friend, or I can go to a website and download that tune. So file sharing really had a profound effect on the music industry. And the music industry was never the same. I mean, the creation of the MP3 really just destroyed the music industry. I mean, once people could file share, that was the end for the music industry. So that's why we have gone from file sharing to downloads to streaming. That's the reason we are where we are now, because file sharing was happening. The record companies weren't making any money. I mean, they couldn't make any money. Nobody was buying music. They couldn't function as an industry. So I don't know if you'd call them technological advances. It kind of was quite destructive, really. I don't know if it was an advance. But I mean, those were the major changes. Home recording. I think by the middle of the '90s, people were making singles and albums, finished masters at home. No need to go to any kind of recording studio. They were able to do it all from home. And that was, just a massive development, really, because going to recording studios was really expensive. So, home recording, changed a lot of people's lives.
Sounds like a marriage, for better and for worse. The pros and cons of technology, and now with artificial intelligence, I wonder how this will further alter the future of music production and distribution. So, Lindsay, what was a landmark moment for you during this period of time?
I suppose, in a way, the first thing that comes to mind was the kind of death of Tupac and the death of the Notorious B.I.G. They kind of seemed like really significant moments. It was almost like the death of Princess Di. It was kind of, it really profoundly affected everybody, because they were these two amazing artists who were just absolute icons. Just people loved them. They loved them. And when they passed away, it was like, this is madness. This has to stop. Gang warfare. Let's remove the gang warfare from music, because the gang warfare carries on. We're going to lose a lot more artists. So, and the gang warfare kind of persists in London to this day. We've got gang warfare in London, killing off artists. It's like, we would have thought they would have learned lessons from Tupac and Biggie, but they didn't. It's almost like, what a way to go, Let me be part of this. I'll go down in flames, go down in history. That's like, it was quite a moment, really, when those two passed away, or were murdered, rather. And I thought it would change things, but it didn't. I think pretty much all the things I've talked about. For me, one of the most satisfying things was back in the when I was growing up, the only radio station I had was Radio One. I just had one radio station, and then there was the first ever commercial radio station in London, Capital Radio. Then we also used to listen to another radio station that we could pick up on AM radios called Radio Luxembourg, actually broadcasting in English from Luxembourg. So back in the day, there was very little choice. There was, all you could really hear were the big hits by the big artists. That's all you could hear. And the wonderful thing that happened was, pirate radio allowed us to hear all the other stuff that was going on. And there was so much going on that people just didn't know about. So, the pirate radio was just a wonderful, wonderful moment in time. And in terms of music making, I mean, back in the day, a soul music or a dance music maker back in the day would have had to make kind of very mainstream poppy music to get played on those few radio stations. But once there were more radio stations and more places where they could send their music, then these musicians were a little freer to make their own kind of music. They didn't have to make pop music to get played on the radio. It allowed all of these people from, Windrush generation, second generation, third generation, it allowed all these makers of soul and disco and funk and reggae and hip-hop, it allowed them to make their own music and sound the way they wanted to sound. They didn't have to sanitize it or dilute it just to get played on the few radio stations. So once we had the variety and the choice of radio stations, we could hear different kinds of musics, and the artists making the music could be freer and be more creative and be themselves.
I love that. And for me, this is what music is all about. This is why I do what I do. I believe in free expression and deriving from the heart and soul. No matter what that sounds or looks like, all creativity, I believe, should be shared with the world. And lastly, do you feel that the UK government values and appreciates music?
I mean, they have tried as much as possible down the decades to remove music from the school curriculum. So, I don't even think they wanted any kind of music at all being taught in schools. So, I mean, as far as I can see, music lessons were being cut everywhere. So they didn't even have interest in classical music, let alone pop music. So I'm sure Blair was totally oblivious to anything going on that scene.
That's quite tragic, but on the bright side, music is still part of the British curriculum. But personally, I do believe that Britain has a long way to go in amplifying the access to music for all age groups and demographics. Thank you very much, Lindsay, for taking the time out to sit with me today, to fly back in time to help us all understand a little bit more of the music history in London. It's the London thing. As always,